Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey. What happens when a battle-hardened soldier returns home, only to find the war waiting for him isn't over? Logan Calloway spent years fighting for his country, but nothing could prepare him for the ultimate betrayal: the woman he loved, the home he built, and the daughter he swore to protect taken over by criminals. With his military instincts and unwavering love for his daughter, Logan embarks on a mission for justice, redemption, and revenge. Will he reclaim what was his? Or will the past consume him? Subscribe now to Life Stories and dive into today's gripping tale. War has a way of reshaping a man. Not just his body but his mind, his soul. After years of combat, I had learned to live with the weight of loss, with the echo of orders shouted over gunfire, with the cold calculation needed to survive. But nothing, not even the battlefield, could prepare me for the war I was about to fight. It was my last night at Fort Valor, a forward operating base in the blistering heat of Iraq. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and gun oil, familiar scents that had long since settled into my skin. I stood at the observation post, watching the horizon bathed in the dying light of day, my rifle slung over my shoulder, my senses always alert. Even after 15 years of service, the tension never faded. The waiting, the watching, always expecting an attack. Most men would be celebrating on their final night of deployment. But I was never the kind to pop open a bottle and pretend the weight of responsibility didn't exist. Sophie's picture was in my breast pocket, as it always was. My daughter. My reason for everything. I ran my thumb over the worn edges, remembering the day it was taken, her 16th birthday. Frozen mid-laugh as she twirled in the backyard. My heart ached at the thought of how much I had missed. A voice pulled me from my thoughts. Master Sergeant Calloway, came the voice of Lieutenant Michael Chin, his boots crunching against the gravel as he approached. Your last watch. Must feel good. I forced a smirk, shaking my head. Someone's got to keep these boys alive. Lieutenant. Chin chuckled. Ever the guardian. You know, Logan. Once you're stateside, maybe it's time to actually live for yourself. A real fresh start. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what a fresh start even meant. War was all I knew. But then, Rachel had always talked about new beginnings. Maybe I owed it to her, to Sophie, to finally try. Before I could dwell on it, a young private, James Rodriguez, hurried toward me, a tablet in his hands. His face was tense. Sir, your wife's been trying to reach you through the base communications center. They said it's urgent. A familiar tightness gripped my chest. The last few video calls with Rachel had been different, short, tense. Her usual warmth replaced with clipped responses and averted eyes. Deployment stress, I had told myself. But deep down, my gut had whispered that something was wrong. Thank you. Private, I said, already moving. By the time I reached the communication center, my pulse was hammering. Before I could connect to the terminal, my satellite phone buzzed, a restricted number. I hesitated for only a second before answering. Dad. Sophie's voice. Barely a whisper, but trembling. My stomach twisted. I need help, she continued, forcing the words out. Mom, she has this new man, Travis Cole, and his friends. They've taken over the house. A slow, dangerous fire began to burn in my chest. What do you mean? Taken over? My voice was calm, controlled, but my free hand curled into a fist. They're everywhere, she whispered. Drinking, smoking, making a mess. And they make me clean up after them. I pressed my fingers to my forehead, breathing through the rising fury. Then her voice cracked. Dad. They're planning something. I heard them talking about you. About setting a trap when you come home. They said they'd make me watch. The cold rage inside me solidified into something darker. Something I hadn't felt since my first kill in combat. Where's your mother? I asked, my voice tight. With him. Sophie whispered. She chose him. The words struck harder than a bullet. I staggered, gripping the edge of the desk in front of me. I told them you'd make them regret it, she said. Her voice fierce despite the terror I could hear beneath it. But they just laughed. Then, in the background, glass shattered. Rough male voices barked something I couldn't make out. I have to go, Sophie said. Voice rushed. Panicked. They're coming, please. Dad. Please. The line went dead. For a long moment. I stood frozen. My mind processing the horror of what I had just heard. The anger inside me wasn't the kind that burned hot. It was glacial. Sinking into my bones. Sharpening every instinct I had. I turned on my heel and strode straight to Lieutenant Colonel Ramsey's office. He looked up from his reports as I entered. His expression shifting to concern as he took in my demeanor. Jesus. Calloway. What happened? I need an immediate discharge. Family emergency. Ramsey leaned back in his chair, studying me. You're 3 days from completing your tour. What's so urgent that it can't wait? My daughter's in danger. The words felt foreign leaving my lips. I had always been the one in danger. The one deployed in hostile territory. But my little girl, my Sophie, was the one trapped in a war zone now. My wife. I continued. The word tasting like ash. She's let criminals into our home. They're planning an ambush. I need to handle it myself. Ramsey exhaled, rubbing his temple. Calloway. Think about what you're saying. You have 15 years of service. Commendations. A path to retirement. If you walk now, you'll never get it back. I met his gaze without hesitation. A career means nothing if I don't have a family to come home to. The silence stretched between us. Then, finally, Ramsey sighed, pulling a form from his desk. You're one of the best soldiers I've ever commanded, he said as he began filling out the paperwork. Don't make me regret this. I didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. He looked up once more, his eyes sharp. Calloway. Sir. Make the bastards pay. Within hours, I had processed out and secured a seat on a military transport bound for the States. As the plane lifted off, I reached into my pocket, pulling out Sophie's photo. She had always been strong, but she was still just a girl. And she was alone, surrounded by men who thought they could take from me what mattered most. They had no idea what kind of war they had just started. I closed my eyes, my mind already calculating the next steps. They thought they were setting a trap for me. They were about to learn what it meant to cage a predator. The plane touched down in Dallas just past midnight. The city lights stretched out in endless ribbons of gold and white. But I wasn't seeing them. My mind was already 3 steps ahead, running through every scenario, every angle. I had faced ambushes before, fought enemies who were ruthless and calculating. But this was different. This was personal. By the time I pulled up 3 blocks away from my house, the rage inside me had settled into something quieter, something lethal. The 2-story colonial I had bought with my combat pay was unrecognizable. The manicured lawn was littered with beer cans, cigarette butts, and fast food wrappers. My American flag was gone, replaced by a torn NASCAR banner. Through the open windows, I saw flickering light from a television, heard drunken laughter and music. Shadows moved inside, men who had no business being in my home. Travis Cole's men. I watched for a while, memorizing their faces. 2 of them slouched on the porch, passing a bottle between them. Their holstered guns were easy to spot amateurs. Both of them, carrying their weapons like cheap accessories. They had no discipline, no awareness. My phone buzzed. Frank Dawson. I answered without taking my eyes off the house. Tell me you've got something. Frank sighed. Wish I didn't. Your wife's new man. Travis Cole, he's not just some bar lowlife. He runs a small crew. Mostly ex-cons working muscle-for-hire jobs. But here's where it gets worse. He's in bed with Horizon Development Corporation. I frowned. The real estate company? They're more than that. Frank said. They've been buying up properties all over town, using guys like Travis to convince homeowners to sell cheap. If they refuse, well, let's just say they stop refusing real quick. I clenched my jaw. And Rachel? Frank hesitated. Started about a year ago. She met Travis at some bar while you were deployed. He saw an opening. Played the concerned boyfriend routine. Then he found out about her mother's cancer. A cold weight settled in my chest. He told her he'd help cover the medical bills. Frank continued. Paid for a few treatments up front. But it was never free. Calloway. He kept her on the hook, making her dependent on him. She was so desperate. She let him into your house. Then he brought in his friends. She gave them the keys. I said quietly. She did. Frank admitted. But I don't think she ever realized what kind of people they were. By the time she figured it out, it was too late. Now, they've got control of your house. Your daughter. Everything. I exhaled slowly, forcing down the rage. What about the money? Did he actually help her mother? Not the way she thinks. Frank said grimly. He paid just enough to keep treatments from being cut off. But most of it, he pocketed. Your wife's been draining your joint account, thinking it's going to her mom's care. It's not. I closed my eyes for a moment. Betrayal wasn't new to me, I'd seen it in war. In men who turned their backs when the pressure became too much. But this was a different kind of treachery. Then my phone vibrated again. A message from an unknown number. One new video. I tapped it open. And my stomach turned to ice. Sophie. Standing in my kitchen. Forced to wash dishes while a man I didn't recognize leaned against the counter. Watching her. He reached out. Grabbed her arm. She yanked away. Her face twisted in disgust. He laughed. The video ended. But the image burned itself into my mind. My fingers tightened around the phone, cracking the plastic case. Frank's voice was cautious. Logan. They think they've won. I murmured. My voice barely above a whisper. They think they can take my home, threaten my daughter, and walk away. Frank said nothing for a long moment. Then, what do you need? I opened my eyes. Cold and clear. Everything. By dawn, I had everything I needed. Mac Torres, my old unit's communications specialist, had come through, as he always did. He had eyes inside my house, microphones in key rooms, and a secure feed running straight to my phone. Every word, every move Travis Cole and his men made, I knew it all. I sat in a dingy motel room, staring at the screens Mac had set up. My house, my home, had been desecrated. The once pristine living room was filled with beer bottles and trash. The walls were scuffed. My furniture stained. My photos either broken or missing. And worst of all, Sophie moved through it like a ghost. Shoulders hunched. Eyes downcast. Through the audio feed, I listened. She ain't even that scared anymore, one of Travis' men said with a chuckle. Girl's got a little fire in her. Yeah, another voice sneered. Maybe she needs to be taught her place. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached. Then Travis' voice cut through. Smug and lazy. Don't be stupid. We keep her in line. But hands off. She's leverage. Her old man's a soldier when he comes back. We'll make him watch. A pause. Then laughter. I forced myself to breathe. To think. To stay in control. My rage wouldn't save Sophie. But strategy would. Mac's voice crackled through my earpiece. They've got no real discipline. Logan. No patrols. No security system beyond a couple cameras I already hacked. They think they're invincible. I exhaled. That makes them weak. Mac hummed in agreement. That. And the fact that Travis is too busy playing mob boss to realize his empire's built on sand. He's working with Horizon Development. But they don't respect him. He's a tool to them, expendable. And the money? Mac pulled up bank statements on his laptop. He's been siphoning from Rachel. Yeah. But also from Horizon. He's skimming from his own employers. Which means the minute he stops being useful, he's dead. I nodded slowly. Then I won't just take him down. I'll make sure he has nowhere left to run. Frank had been busy, too. He'd found the warehouse where Travis' next shipment was coming in, drugs. Smuggled through fake construction materials. Meant to be distributed across Dallas. It wasn't just about intimidation anymore. This was organized crime. And Horizon Development was at the heart of it. But the betrayal that cut deepest was Rachel's. I hadn't reached out to her yet. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I'd scream. Or if I'd just feel nothing at all. She had chosen him. Maybe out of desperation. Maybe out of fear, but she had chosen him nonetheless. Mac must have sensed my thoughts. She's not clean in this, Logan. But she's not a monster either. Just weak. Weak. That was worse than evil. I shook the thought away, focusing on the plan. Tonight, we start making moves. Turn them against each other. Cut them off. Make them bleed before they even realize they're in a fight. Mac grinned. And then, I watched the screen as Sophie moved through the house, clutching a framed photo of me in my dress uniform. She held it to her chest, whispering something I couldn't hear. Then she straightened, wiped her tears, and squared her shoulders. She was still fighting. I would too. I stood. Then we end this. The digital clock on Mac's surveillance system read 2:13 a.m. when I moved in. The neighborhood was quiet. Families slept behind locked doors, unaware that in one house, criminals were drinking, laughing, believing themselves untouchable. I crept through the backyard, the weight of my combat knife familiar against my thigh. Mac's voice crackled through my earpiece. Security feed loops are active. You've got 3 minutes before the system resets. 3 minutes was plenty. 2 of Travis' men dozed on lawn chairs near the back door, an empty whiskey bottle between them. Their guns were tucked in their waistbands, useless in their current state. Sloppy. Careless. I moved fast. A precise strike to the first man's neck cut off his air, dropping him without a sound. The second managed a sleepy groan before my forearm crushed his throat. 2 down. I stepped inside through the back door. Silent. Methodical. The house reeked of cigarettes, alcohol, and sweat. 5 tangos inside. Mac whispered in my ear. Travis and 2 others in the master bedroom. 1 in the guest room. 1 in the kitchen. Sophie was in her room. Rachel too. The kitchen guard was heading for the basement breaker. I caught him at the top of the stairs, one arm around his neck, the other pressing against his skull. A quick twist. Silent. Efficient. 3 down. Then, above me, a voice. The hell? Go check the power. A pair of heavy footsteps pounded toward the stairs. I waited. Let the next man come down. As soon as he reached the bottom, I grabbed his gun arm, twisted it behind his back, and snapped his wrist before slamming him into the wall. 4 down. Travis' right-hand man, Billy Thompson, emerged from the guest room with a shotgun. I let him see me. Let the panic settle in. His hands shook as he raised the barrel. Wait. Man. We can. I was on him before he finished, twisting the gun out of his grip. My knee slammed into his solar plexus, doubling him over, then an elbow to the base of his skull. 5 down. The only one left was Travis. I pulled a flashbang from my vest, ripped the pin free, and tossed it through the master bedroom door. The explosion of white light and deafening sound filled the house. I stepped through the smoke. Travis was on the ground, disoriented, his pistol knocked loose. His ears were ringing, his mouth moved, but no sound came out. I crouched beside him, grabbed his hair, and forced him to look at me. Hi. Travis. His eyes went wide. No man. We can talk. I smashed my fist into his jaw. knocking his head back against the floor. Blood spattered his shirt. Rachel stood frozen in the corner. Eyes huge. Breath shallow. "Logan," she whispered. "What did you do?" I ignored her. "Where's Sophie?" A small voice answered from behind me. "Dad." I turned. Sophie stood at her bedroom door. Her eyes red but steady. I opened my arms. "Come here, sweetheart." She ran to me, burying her face in my chest. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "I told them you would. But they just laughed." I kissed the top of her head. "They're not laughing now." Then I turned back to Travis, still coughing up blood on my floor. "We're going to have a little conversation," I said. And he was going to tell me everything. Travis slumped in the chair, his hands zip-tied behind his back. Blood dripped from his nose onto his shirt, staining the cheap fabric. His cocky smirk was gone. Now, there was only fear. I crouched in front of him, my knife in one hand, his own pistol in the other. His lip trembled. "Man, listen. We can make a deal." I pressed the barrel of his gun under his chin. "You already had a deal. You had a home, a woman who trusted you, and a daughter who had no choice but to endure what you put her through. Now, you have nothing." His Adam's apple bobbed. "Start talking," I said. His mouth opened, then closed. I sighed, shifting the pistol. Okay, he gasped. It started with the money. Rachel, she needed cash for her mom's treatments. I had connections. I helped her out by stealing from her. I said coldly. "Not at first," he insisted. "At first, I really did help. But then, man, I realized she was vulnerable. Easy to manipulate. I kept her scared. Kept her desperate. Told her I'd take care of everything if she just let me handle things. And she did." Rachel let out a soft sob from the corner, her hands covering her mouth. I didn't look at her. And then, I pressed. He swallowed hard. Then Horizon got involved. They needed houses. Good locations in quiet neighborhoods, places they could use as stash houses and meeting points. Your place. Perfect. Rachel was already under my thumb, so it wasn't hard to convince her to let my guys stay there. I exhaled through my nose, steadying the cold fury inside me. "And the money?" He licked his lips, eyes darting toward Rachel. She thought it was all going to her mom's care. It wasn't. Horizon only gave me enough to keep the hospital from cutting her off. The rest, pocketed. Rachel let out a broken breath, her whole body shaking. I looked at her now. "Still think he was just helping?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. My voice turned sharper. "What about the cops? The politicians? Who's on Horizon's payroll?" He shook his head wildly. "I don't know all of them, I swear. Just the local guys, Captain Wallace, Judge Monroe, some city council members. Horizon doesn't trust me enough to tell me the big stuff. I was just useful. And now that you're not." His breath hitched. He knew. He'd seen it before. He was a pawn. And pawns get sacrificed. I leaned in close. "You're going to testify. Every name. Every dollar. Every order you got from Horizon, you're putting it all on record." "Are you insane?" he hissed. "If I talk, they'll kill me." I smiled. "If you don't, I'll kill you first." His chest rose and fell in quick, panicked breaths. Then, finally, his head dropped. "Fine. I'll talk." I stood up and signaled Frank Dawson, who had been waiting outside. The old cop stepped in, his badge gleaming under the dim light. "We got it recorded. Every word." Mac's voice crackled through my earpiece. Frank grabbed Travis by the arm and hauled him up. "You just ruined a lot of powerful people's day, kid. Let's make sure it sticks." As the cops dragged Travis away, I turned to Rachel. She still stood frozen, her face pale, eyes hollow. "Sophie's packing a bag," I told her. "She's staying with my sister. You'll make a statement at the station." And after that, I met her gaze. My voice final. You and I are going to have a very long talk. By the time the sun rose over Dallas, Travis was sitting in an interrogation room, spilling every dirty secret he had. The police station buzzed with activity. Frank's team was already preparing warrants, gathering evidence, setting up arrests. Horizon Development had spent years operating in the shadows, using money and muscle to keep people silent. But now, thanks to Travis' confession, they were exposed. I stood outside the station, leaning against my truck, watching the morning light stretch across the city. It was over. Or at least, this part of it was. Rachel sat on the curb a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself, eyes staring at the ground. She had given her statement, answered every question, filled out every form. But I knew the real weight of everything had only just started sinking in. She finally looked up at me. Logan. I waited. I didn't know, she whispered. Not everything. Not what he was really doing. I exhaled through my nose. That's the problem. Rachel. You didn't want to know. Tears welled in her eyes. I was scared. I thought, she swallowed hard. I thought if I just went along with it, if I didn't fight back, it would be okay. That I could keep Sophie safe. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. And how did that work out? Her face crumpled. I ran a hand over my face. I had spent the last 15 years fighting battles, but none of them had ever been this personal. You put her in danger, I said. My voice quieter now. You let a predator into our home. You let him take over our lives. She sniffled, wiping at her face. I know. I studied her for a long moment. Where do you go from here? She shook her head. I don't know. I sighed. Your mother's still in treatment. I'll make sure she gets the care she needs. After that, that's up to you. Her eyes filled with fresh tears. Why would you still help me? Because Sophie loves her grandmother, I said simply. And I protect the people she loves. Rachel broke down in quiet sobs, shoulders shaking. But I didn't reach for her. I had spent enough years being her safety net. Now, she had to find her own way. At that moment, Sophie stepped out of the station, a small duffel bag over her shoulder. She looked between us, sensing the tension. Ready? I asked her. She nodded, walking over to me without hesitation. She didn't even look at her mother. Rachel watched her go, her expression shattered. Sophie, she called out softly. My daughter stopped but didn't turn around. I'm sorry, Rachel whispered. For everything. Sophie was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, she said, so am I. And then she got into my truck. As we pulled away, Sophie stared out the window, her fingers gripping the straps of her backpack. You okay, kiddo? I asked. She exhaled slowly. I will be. I reached over, gave her hand a squeeze. You're safe now. That's what matters. She turned to me, her blue eyes steady. What happens now? I looked at the road ahead. Now, we start over. She nodded, as if accepting that answer. But deep down, I knew the truth. There was no real starting over. There was only moving forward. And I had a feeling my fight wasn't over yet. As the dust settled and the sun rose over Dallas, I knew that the battle for my home was over. But the war for justice had just begun. Travis Cole was in prison. Horizon Development was collapsing. And Sophie was safe, but the scars would remain. I had spent years fighting battles overseas, only to return and find the greatest war waiting for me at home. But this wasn't just about revenge. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As I looked at my daughter, stronger than ever, I realized something. This was my true mission now. Some men fight for a paycheck. Others fight for power. I fight for those who have no one else. And if evil thinks it can prey on the weak, it'll have to get through me first. Subscribe to Life Stories for more incredible real-life tales of courage. justice, and redemption.